Welcome to Get Your Spirit in Shape, United Methodist Communications and UMC.org's podcast to help us keep our souls as healthy as our bodies. Today we're talking with Thomas Kemper about missionaries and how learning more about them can help us grow in our own spiritual lives. I'm Joy Avino. Thomas Kemper leads the General Board of Global Ministries, the agency of the United Methodist Church that's responsible for the training and oversight of more than 350 missionaries. As you'll hear in this conversation, our missionaries serve in a variety of ways. They're church planners, medical professionals, theology professors, agricultural experts, and so much more. They come from everywhere and go to everywhere, more than 65 countries around the world. As he was preparing to celebrate the bicentennial of Methodist missions, I got a chance to talk with Thomas on a video conference call about the importance of missions for our church and for each of our own spiritual lives. Thomas Kemper, welcome to Get Your Spirit in Shape.
Thank you, Joe. It's good to be here.
And it's great to have you as part of the podcast today. You are the top executive for the General Board of Global Ministries, and part of your job is to oversee the missionaries and mission projects of the United Methodist Church. Can you give me an idea of what those things are and how many people are in them and where they are in the world?
Yeah, we have, as we say, missionaries literally from everywhere to everywhere. So the traditional idea very often still when you come to churches here in the United States is that missionaries are people who are Americans sent from the US, very often white, going to, I sometimes simply say, to hot countries somewhere. You know, this is kind of traditional idea still. But this is not the reality because we are a global church. We are a worldwide network. So we are really dipping into the gifts and graces of people from all around the world to be sent and commissioned as missionaries. So of our 350 missionaries, the international one, more than half now are no longer from the US. But you could have a missionary, for instance, from the Philippines. In December, I spent a few days with a missionary couple from the Philippines working with Filipino migrants in Taiwan. Or you could have an African from the Ivory Coast starting a new United Methodist Church in the Central African Republic and bringing all this experience. Or in Ivory Coast, we have a missionary who is engaged in evangelism and church growth from the Congo. So it's really something where I think the strength of our church of being a global network also plays out when we send missionaries from everywhere to everywhere.
Yeah. And lots of times when I think of missionaries, I think of those who are kind of like evangelists, just kind of out, preaching out in a big tent meeting somewhere. But I understand that our missionaries do a lot more than that. What are some of the things that our missionaries are doing?
Yeah, and we have in the United Methodist Church, we have the so-called 4 areas of focus, where we say one area is evangelism and church growth, it's leadership, training, there's ministry with the poor, and global health. And we at this time had looked at our missionaries and said we want to try to have missionaries in all 4 categories. So you have missionaries who start new churches, who are evangelists, especially in those areas in Southeast Asia where we start new United Methodist presence, congregation, house churches. So very often their missionary is also an evangelist, as a church planter. There are other places where a missionary is a professor of theology or in training. We have just recruited a new missionary, for instance, to be in Peter Maritzburg in the theological seminary there of the Methodist Church in Southern Africa. So that is another part. Missionaries as trainers, as leader, professors, coaches. The third is we have in January we were just together in South Africa for our agriculture summit, where we brought together all the United Methodist conferences in Africa to look what can we do around agriculture. The church has so much land. And as part of it, we have about 10 missionaries who are agriculturalists working in Africa with the Methodist churches in really improving the agriculture work, the income from agriculture, but also the training of young people in agriculture. And the last one is the global health. So we have, that is from the beginning, missionaries were doctors, nurses, and this continues until today, that we have doctors and nurses and other health professionals who are missionaries all over the world, really.
Wow. So is there a way you can kind of give us a sketch of like, what's it like in the day of a life of a missionary, or is it so varied that you really? Yeah.
That's a nice question. Yeah, I think that is so different. That is so different in each case. That would make it very difficult. But let me say this example. I was in Taipei, in the industrial zone where our iPhones are being made,
Oh,
right
yeah.
there. And there are thousands and thousands of Filipino migrants who are cheap labor, who live there, who come there. Some of them are Methodists, many, many, many are not, of course. And our missionary couple there has moved right into the area, into the industrial zone where the factories are, and has a storefront transformed into a church. So it's the storefront. Next door, you have a karaoke bar, and the other side there's a restaurant. On top of the sanctuary, which is a storefront, or let's say in the back, you have a big kitchen because eating together is important. And then on top, they live and they share it with some in emergency or with newcomers. They really have been there to share their life. Mission is really about sharing your life, coming alongside people. And I was very impressed by this work, the solidarity, the pastoral elements, but also the advocacy for these people who suffer in these almost slave-like relationships sometimes when they are defenseless migrants in these great operations like in Taipei and corporations around the world.
Yeah, yeah. So I also understand that you spent 8 years as a missionary in Brazil, was it?
Right.
What was that like?
That was life transforming for me. I mean, my wife and I, we went there in '86, so that is a long, long time ago. But two of our three children were born in Brazil, so we have a deep relationship to Brazil, to the Brazilian Methodist Church, and I have really learned so much of who I am today from these years of missionary service. I was at the Methodist Seminary in São Paulo, but I also had an opportunity to work with people in the streets, homeless people, because at that time there was a group of Catholic nuns who had moved into the city center and started to share their life with those who collected trash to make some money, who just had nowhere to go but to sleep under the bridges there in the center of São Paulo. And to experience this, to see how the gospel is good news, especially for the poor, for those on the margins, that was life transforming. It's much more difficult when you are the general secretary and you have a nice office and a good salary. But it's still something which drives me, this solidarity and this good news for the poor, as we find it throughout the gospel and throughout the Bible.
And I imagine that's a common theme, no matter what the missionaries are doing in their assigned location. A lot of time they have that contact with the most marginalized people in the society.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely the case, especially when we start new churches in some of our areas in Southeast Asia. You start with people on the margins, people who are open to hear this liberating good news of Jesus Christ, who came to change their lives and give them hope for their lives and for the communities.
What were some of is there like an experience or an event that kind of stands out for you as something that happened when you were a missionary that was really a life-altering experience, or something that comes to mind often?
Well, yeah, these Catholic nuns I volunteered with, we had a soup kitchen. And there are many soup kitchens in the world, but this was very special because what happened was we went under the bridge after the weekly market. And then we started to negotiate with the vendors some leftover vegetables, fruits, head of the fish, which had not been sold because people just wanted the fillet, but not the head. So we were together with the people living in the street, trying to get the food we needed for our soup kitchen. And then the cooking was done on an open fire. And the firewood also came from the market because it was the boxes people had carried the vegetables in, or the groceries, or whatever they were selling on the market. So basically everything, with the exception of the salt and oil, everybody was able to contribute. And that changed the relationships. We were sitting together, we were cutting off the rotten parts of a cucumber or whatever we used, and then prepared the soup together, and we ate it from tins, which were transformed into little tins we used just as our soup balls. So it was something where everybody contributed, everybody received. We were eating together, preparing together, and then we celebrated worship together under the bridge. And it completely changed, transformed that moment, because it was not some people who gave and others received, but it was about all receiving and giving. And that's what mission is about, you know?
And you mentioned earlier about, coming alongside the people. That's a great example of that.
Yeah, I think it was D.T. Niles who famously said, evangelism is one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread. And that really changes the perspective on how you are in mission, right, and how we want to send missionaries.
Oh, I like that quote. I like that quote a lot. So in your role now as the General Secretary of Global Ministries, what kind of training do our missionaries receive before they go out into the field? Is there anything special that comes through GBGM?
Yeah, our missionaries have a 4-week training right here in Atlanta. We also have a whole group of young adult missionaries, the Global Mission Fellows, about 120 in service every year. Their training very often is not happening in the United States. But for instance, this year we are planning our training in Cambodia because we are really struggling with visa issues. The restriction on visa makes our life very difficult. People don't get visa even for the training. They don't get visa for itineration here in the United States. And that is a constant struggle we have. So some of our training now is taking place internationally, where we have an easier access to bring our missionaries in. And then the training, of course, is cross-cultural communication, it's theology of mission. It's the day-to-day practical questions around missionary service. It's a very, very wide range of training, but it's also a way to create a spirit of unity among the missionaries. So even if you serve in different parts of the world, today through Facebook, Skype, FaceTime, there are ways of keeping that unity among this class of missionaries. So it has 2 elements. It is the community building, and it is the learning and the training for this specific role.
Wow, I hadn't thought of that. That's great that they, even though they're different parts of the world, in some ways they're doing very similar things. So it's great that they can stay connected.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think many United Methodists feel kind of far removed from our missionaries that are on other, because they're far away from us. Usually we might see them once every couple of years when they come back, to get some support and do those kinds of things. So tell me about the importance of missionaries and why the average member should be invested in what our missionaries are doing.
Yeah, I agree with you, Joe. This is a real challenge, especially as missionaries become so international. In the old days, so to say, there were John and Mary who you knew from Sunday school. You may have been together in Sunday school class, and then some moment they felt called into missionary service, and the whole church prayed for them, supported them financially, sent them letters, and it was kind of a natural fit. If your missionary is from Cameroon and French speaking, and so how do you create that relationship? And we are experimenting with Skype presence in worship services here. As I said, sometimes it's difficult to even get them for itineration. So that is something where I hope our local churches learn more and more to also embrace missionaries who do not speak English, who are not from your local community, from a different culture, because it's so important that we have these missionaries from everywhere to everywhere. But I think what a local church really benefits from is to become part of the worldwide church, to see it in a concrete person, how this is playing out to be a worldwide connection in other parts of the world, and see it through the eyes of a missionary, of somebody very concrete. They know the name, they can pray for, they come for a visit every 2-3 years to the local church, and that creates really a sense of living our Christian faith on a global map, which you not get if you are not connected to a missionary. And I think that's an important part.
And there are ways to do that, right? I mean, there's ways on the website that we can learn more about missionaries in parts of the world we might care about. Can you speak more to that?
Yeah, on our website, umcmission.org, you find a lot of examples. You have a bio on every missionary we have. You find the bio and a short description of the placement. We have also a series of, it's called Fearless Fellows, where the young people, the Global Mission Fellows, are being interviewed, a brief interview about what they do and what their work is. And then there's also a series called I Am a Missionary. And these are also testimonies from our missionaries. So this is really a first glance you can get. And then you can work with our itineration office and invite missionaries to your church. So you can build a stronger relationship with specific missionaries you want to be really connected and related with.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of people who, how to word this? Do you have any examples of people who aren't missionaries but have seen their faith grow because they're supporting a missionary? Like you've seen something happen inside of them?
Yeah, I think my own local church, we support a missionary couple in Laos, one of our mission initiatives. And I think in our church we have a lot of people who are not United Methodist. I mean, they are not members yet, but they have come because it's their local church at the corner of the city where they live.
Yeah.
And suddenly, through this, I think their faith is growing to see that my faith is not just about what is happening here, right at this corner of my city, but I'm linked to Christians and to a world community and a faith which goes so far beyond my local situation. And I think this is encouraging, it's challenging, but it really deepens your faith when you get into this experience.
And expanding that worldview. I mean, so often we see our faith in our own context, and being able to see that in a broader must be really helpful for people.
Yeah, I strongly believe that this is helpful if it is really done on a regular basis. If you pray informed for these missionaries, and of course we encourage our missionary to write newsletters, to stay in touch with these people they support. So it really creates this relationship.
Yeah, wonderful. So, and as United Methodists, we know that this has been part of our history almost from the very beginning of the Methodist Church, from John Wesley going to where poor people gathered to share medicine and the gospel, and then Thomas Coates travels to the West Indies. What do you think makes United Methodists so passionate about missions?
I think we are passionate about mission because that's how we started. I mean, I always say the secret. One of the secrets was not so much. Maybe there was a doctrinal questions and others. I totally agree with that too. But I think one of the secrets was John Wesley was on his horse. He was traveling. He couldn't take much with him. He had to build relationship. He had to go to people and talk to them and receive from them something to eat, hospitality. And the same was true here for Francis Asbury, when he traveled to the West. And the circuit riders, all this built relationships. And that's how our mission and our movement grew, because we were able to really build relationship and not be parochial, not to stay just in our parish. The famous word, the world is my parish, because you were going out, you received and gave to people in being in mission and traveling. And that is happening through missionaries today. They leave their home place, they leave their family, their security, their safe place, become vulnerable. But this vulnerability, this need to receive from the people where they go, opens incredible opportunities for mission and for church growth.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I also am aware that in 2019, we are celebrating the bicentennial of Methodist missions. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, we are celebrating 2019 as a very special year. In April 5, 1819, the first Methodist Mission Society was founded in Manhattan, in New York. This is the beginning of the United Methodist Church and its predecessors and the different mission boards, EUB, and all that today are the United Methodist Church. And what is fascinating, Joe, and we will celebrate this at a special event in September, is that the first Methodist missionary was an African American. It was John Stewart, who in 1819 went to be in mission alongside the Wyandotte Native American in Ohio, specifically in Upper Sandusky. And that is such an amazing story because the engagement of missionaries with native people was not always life-giving. We know the story of assimilation, annihilation, thousands of natives who had died in the Conquista. So this story is very special. When I went to Upper Sandusky last year for the first time to the place where John Stewart is buried, there is a cemetery which belongs to the Methodist Church. It was given by the Wyandotte to the Methodists when they had to leave Ohio after the Indian Removal Act of President Andrew Jackson. And they wanted to make sure that their ancestors were not removed from that place. Their chiefs were not removed. So they reburied, actually, John Stewart from the place where he died on his farm to this place where their chiefs were buried. And this still exists today. And this year, we will give this piece of land back to the Wyandottes, who, for all these almost 200 years, have seen John Stewart almost as a saint. And I think it is positive and life-giving mission through John Stewart because he was also from the margins. He was somebody, as an African-American, who did not come from a place of power, but he came from a place, as I said at the beginning, of sharing, of having to receive, being made welcome. And it is an amazing mission story and life-giving mission story that started with John Stewart going to be in mission among the Wyandotte, crossing boundaries, crossing cultures, languages, 200 years ago. So we are pretty proud of this beginning of the Methodist mission and are celebrating it in a very special way this year in different places and with different events.
Wow. And did you say, I think I heard you say in there that his grave was moved so that he would be buried with the chiefs? Is that the idea?
Yeah. He was buried on his farm because a missionary in those days, that's why the Mission Society was founded 200 years ago, to support him. But he had come already some years ago, and he really started by farming and sharing the gospel. And so when he died only a few years later, he was buried on his farm. But then later, when the Native Americans had to leave, they reburied him right there where their cemetery was, alongside their elders and their chiefs. And also they have the two first Methodist Wyandotte lay preachers who are buried there. Wow. So it's a fascinating place. Small place, Upper Sandusky in Ohio.
Yeah, what a fascinating story, though. And what an interesting kind of going back to your idea of two people, kind of the one beggar offering another beggar where the bread is. I mean, kind of a good illustration of the way that happens. That's great. And so are there other events that are happening to kind of celebrate this bicentennial?
Yeah, in April, we have a big conference here in Atlanta, Hearing God's Call, Past, Present, and Future, which brings together about 250 mission leaders and mission theologians from around the world. It's a joint event of Kemper School of Theology and Global Ministries. We have some key speakers, Bishop Mande Muyombo from the DR Congo. We have Arun Jones, who is a professor of evangelism here at Kentler School of Theology and World Christianity. We have Joy Eva Bohol, who is a young person working with the youth department of the World Council of Churches, and a young Methodist from the Philippines bringing a youth address. So and then many workshops also on Native Americans, of course, but many other aspects of mission. So it's a very large conference, which will be a highlight, and it's exactly in the week in April where we are celebrating the 200 years. And then 21st of September, we will all be in Upper Sandusky. The Ohio conferences and the Wyandottes, they will come with several bus loads of people to celebrate together John Stewart as a first missionary.
That is so remarkable. That is so remarkable. Well, the last question I ask every guest of Get Your Spirit in Shape is, how do you keep your spirit in shape? And
thanks. But when I saw the question, I was thinking one thing I really want to share is, do you know the Moravian watchwords? Have you heard about them?
No, tell me about them.
Yeah, so that is something which I have practiced or used for many, many years. It was really started by Zinzendorf, the founder of the Moravians, Count Zinzendorf in Germany, as I'm German, and they're very famous in Germany, but really used all around the world. And for the first were really in the 1726 or so. I think it was in written format in 1731. You had the first watchwords, and they draw a watchword for the day. the first year they did it, they went from house to house in Herrenhout. They had about 30 houses which belonged to the community, and the person came in the morning, they drew a word from the Bible, and this was the watchword for the day. But now it's much more sophisticated. They draw the words from the Old Testament, from the Hebrew Bible for every day. And then somebody draws a New Testament word. And that New Testament is it's not drawn, but chosen to correspond with the watchword for the day from the Old Testament. And then the third element is a verse from the hymnal or a poem or something which speaks to these words. And I use it for my personal devotion. But what I feel so strongly about this is being read by hundreds of thousands of people around the world. So when I read it, I don't read it alone, although I don't read it alone. And I receive it on Twitter. So it comes into my Twitter feed and it breaks into my day and it connects me with people around the world, especially many friends and sisters and brothers in Germany. But it's now being used, I don't know in how many languages, a little bit like the Upper Room, but let's say more simple. It's just the word of God, Old Testament, New Testament, and a verse, a hymn, or something. So this is something very, very strong for me, which I've used for a long, long time.
Well, I'll have to provide a link to that when we do the show notes for this page so that people can
that would be great. Yeah.
Moravian watchwords. Yeah. I have a question that just kind of occurred to me off the top of my head, so apologize for this, but how many languages do you speak personally?
I really speak German, Portuguese, and English. I can manage in French and Spanish. The Spanish because of the Portuguese, it's more portuñol, as we call it.
Okay.
And the French is, I used to speak much better. I even studied in Paris for a semester. So my French was pretty good, but I don't use it much now. So I can get along, I can understand and read, but I would not say I'm fluent in French at this moment.
That's amazing.
It helps.
It's just funny with the more missionaries I meet, their ability to be able to speak in multiple languages is remarkable. I was talking to a missionary from Africa who couldn't count the number of African languages that she could speak, in addition to English, French, and it was crazy.
No, and Africans are probably the most gifted. I think it's because they start very early on to have several languages. So you create a kind of, you almost have it in your DNA that you are much more capable than others in learning languages and speaking languages. So that's definitely a gift, especially our African brothers and sisters have.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, Thomas, thank you so much. I've really appreciated this time, and it's been a wonderful conversation today.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And blessings for your podcast. It's a great way of getting the good news out. Thank you for your work.
That was Thomas Kemper of the General Board of Global Ministries. To learn more about our United Methodist Missionaries, the bicentennial of Methodist missions, and the Moravian watchwords and their connection to our Methodist history, go to umc.org/podcasts and look for this episode. There's a link on that page to help you find other United Methodist podcasts that you might enjoy, and another link to my email address so you can share your thoughts about Get Your Spirit in Shape with me. Thanks for listening. I'll be back soon with another conversation that will help us keep our souls as healthy as our bodies. I'm Joe Iovino. Peace.